For years, if you wanted true force feedback in your flight simulator, you had two choices. Spend a fortune on high-end commercial gear or spend hours building a do-it-yourself rig. But today, everything changes. This is the brand new Moza Flight AB6, a full metal 6Nm force feedback base paired with a carbon fiber reinforced flight stick designed to let you feel the air, not just see it. Moza sent this unit over to me, and today we're gonna look at it and we're gonna do an unbiased look to see if it lives up to the hype. In this video we are diving deep. We'll unbox and review this heavy duty hardware. Look closely at the software that drives it, walk through exactly how to calibrate it for the precision control, and finally we'll fire up Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 to push those dual servo motors. The box for Moza is pretty big, but there's also a lot of things in it. For example, the clamp is included, of course the joystick itself, the base, and then some manuals, some stickers which you can apply to the joystick, and of course the required cables, including the power adapter, because this joystick has force feedback. To connect the stick to the dock, you need to pull out the cable a little bit from the stick and then connect it to the dock. And then once you've done that, you can place the stick on the dock and make sure that you screw it to the dock so it's tightly connected. And as you can see, currently it's tightly connected, but due to the fact that there's no power on it, it will simply move around. Since the base of the joystick is pretty big and pretty heavy, you might consider to use the clamp so you can connect it to your desk, because it's pretty heavy and it's also not really convenient if you put it on your desk, to be honest. If you power on the joystick, it will start moving around. Don't worry, this is perfectly normal. It looks like this is part of the calibration process. I'm not 100% sure about this, because the joystick needs to calibrate itself. It will do this each time you start the joystick. Before you can start using your joystick, you first need to download some software. You can get it from the Moza Racing website. If you go to the support section, that's where you will find the download center. Inside the download center, you will find the Moza Cockpit. And the Moza Cockpit allows you to configure the joystick, calibrate the joystick, but also create profiles. I'm not going to show the install process because that's really easy. So simply download it, and I will now continue with configuring the joystick. So the first time you start the Moza Cockpit software, you need to set the language. By default it's set to Chinese, at least it looks like. So you can simply click English, and then you can define some other options such as the theme, is it light or dark, and you can say, hey, I want to automatically start up Moza, yes or no. After that, you will see that the devices should be shown as active. However, in my case, I need to unplug and replug the devices. And if you do that, keep in mind that the interface will completely freeze. I'm not sure if that's normal, but I experienced it multiple times that you simply can't click anything. So if you click on Windows Game Control, you can see it also freezes, but this is normal. Don't do anything, simply wait, because they will start to appear. It looks like that the software is scanning the USB ports. So at one point I also disconnected the rest of my USB device to see if that, I would say, helps. You can even see that I would say if I click the interface, it simply, I would say, goes in gray screen. I thought, okay, hey, maybe I should simply quit the software, but I thought, okay, hey, let's leave it running because actually it's busy with something. That's also what you see in the task manager. The task manager also says it's unresponsive, but it still is consuming resources. So after a few seconds, or minutes, it was initially, it came up with this interface. Because you need to activate the devices. You need to activate them prior to downloading the firmware, which is the next step. That's also mentioned here. So you can simply click activate all, and then once that has been completed, you can, I would say, download the new firmware. You can see that it goes to the serial number, so I'm going to click activate all. Here we go. And then click on complete. Also here there's a delay in the software, so I do think that the software might require some further tuning. So now you can see that the device is updated, and you can also see that I've got the stick and I've got the base, and you can see that there are also some other devices from them, the roller panels and the throttle panel, which I don't have. So we're still simply staying stick with the MSG and the AB6. So that's for now. On the left bottom, you can see that there's a firmware update, and if you can see it very closely, you can see that they will say, or I would say, well, I can simply see the devices, and then when I click update, they will disappear. And believe me, I tried this a lot of times, but at one point I decided to take a different route. Now, the way I updated the firmware was a little bit weird, because as you could see already in this video, I had some issues with updating the firmware. For some reason, it didn't work the way it should work, because the device simply disappeared. So I used a different machine to update the firmware, and on the different machine I was simply able to update it. I would say, need to figure out why it doesn't work. I disconnected every other USB device, but still it was causing issues. Now we've went to that part. Let's have a look at this Moza Cockpit's software, because there are a lot of options. You can see I already configured Flight Simulator, and for Flight Simulator 2024 simply put it to my Xbox comms, Moza Flight Simulator 2024, and then you can use the config button to automatically install everything. This will also make sure that it will install the Moza Wasm plugin, because that's required. In some case, you might want to adjust your aircraft installation folder. That's how they call it, but actually it is the community folder, at least the folder which contains the community content as well as the official content. So be aware of that. Also, you can hover over those E from India's, which gives you an example of that. Once you've done that, you click close. You can see that you need to do this per, I would say, solution, right? So for Flight Simulator 2020, X-Plane require different configuration. Now, the joysticks are configured, you need to calibrate them. And the reason I say it, because if you don't do it, you will likely end up into issues. So you can click on the joystick itself, and that's where you find a lot of options. You can find the cogging, torque calibration, which simply starts moving around the joystick. But the other one, which is even more important because you need to do it manually, is the axis calibration. The axis calibration is used to calibrate both the Z-axis, which is over here, as well as this joystick on the top, on the hatch. If you don't do it, you will, I would say, likely encounter issues. In my case, I had an issue with the Z-axis, which didn't work. And then once I hit the calibration option, I forgot to calibrate this one, that hatch one, and that caused issues. So let me show it quickly. You can click on Start Calibrate, and that's where you then need to move around things. You need to be really quick, as you can see. And this is good, right? So now you're good, and then it should work. If you don't do this, you will likely encounter some issues. In addition to that, you've got the grip settings, which you can say, hey, I want to have bottom mapping, axis map mode, or mixed mode. I left them to the default setting, button mapping, and it works perfectly fine. You can see the joystick has a lot of buttons, but also some screws. And those screws, especially for the Z-axis, you might want to remove some of the screws because this is the handheld. But you see a screw here, and I removed it to make sure that I can use the Z-axis, right? The yaw, what's also known as the yaw functionality from the joystick. Other than that, you can see a lot of coloring options. You can change the light color, you can change the light effect. You can see that change the light brightness. So a lot of options only for the MSG, which is the one which is connected to the AB6, which is the dock. And the dock has a lot of more options. As you can see, it's already selected the axis travel in my case, where I can move around the joystick. I will do it right now, and you will see the axis. The axis have a lot of options. You can change the dead zones, you can change the offset, but you can also invert the axis. In some cases, inverting the axis is required, especially with the throttle axis, because it likely, would say, is working a different way in Flight Simulator 2024 as well as 2020. And you can see I can, I would say, simply use everything, right? So I can completely test the joystick. I didn't test it, or I didn't show it yet in the MSG, but for the MSG, you can do the same thing. You can press all the buttons and then test it around. Now for the base unit, you also have a lot of options. You can use the force feedback mode, direct input, telemetry EFB, or the integrated FFB. Integrated FFB works for me, and if you hover over these items, you can see the description, right? The direct input, the device only reads the game's native force feedback direct input. Telemetry FFB generates force feedback from the aircraft and environmental telemetry data for games without native FFB. And the integrated FFB combines both direct input and telemetry data, using telemetry FFB to supplement missing effects or replace undesired effects suitable for the majority of the games. So if you want to start with this, select this option. That's the one I used. Temperature controls, right? It keeps, I would say, an eye on the temperature because, of course, this device can become pretty hot. It also says avoid touching the metal surface on the base after prolonged use. And then here you see the max torque output, the force feedback, the dampers, etc. Because this joystick really has force feedback, and I must say, I can already tell you, because I of course tested it already, it really feels really nice. In addition to that, you can convert the axis inputs by pressing the start calibration for the x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. You can, let's say, calibrate them individually. And this kind of would say confusing, because I initially thought, okay, hey, let's press the option here, and then you don't get any notification on what you need to do. Whereas if you press the calibration and reset, you might expect that everything is being calibrated, but not everything is calibrated. Only the X and Y axis are calibrated, not the Z axis. So keep that in mind. Now we went to this one. You can also see these booklets, and these booklets are simply opening up a website which contains the documentation. And the website is hosted on your local machine, right? So don't think you're connected to a website, but here you can see, okay, hey, auto calibration, and then you can jump to the documentation. But you can see here also that the links themselves, well, they likely don't show much. I'm not sure what's the issue here. I need to figure out why they're not working. And a lot of the pages are empty. So maybe they need to fix this in a future update. If we go to the throttle panel settings, this is where you can configure the slider axis calibration, because the joystick also has two sliders. One over here and one over here. And those can be, for example, used for, I would say, throttle, right? Either engine 1 and engine 2, or if you prefer to combine them, engine 1 and then this, for example, for the trim, maybe. And then you've got the options over here. You can say axis mode, but you can also do button mapping, or you can do mixed mode. That really depends again on your preferences. If you want to use them as axis, or you want to use them as buttons, or you want to use them in combination mode. I would say it's up to you, because you've got a lot of options. If you put it into axis mode, it will simply be an axis, right? It's simply up and down. But if you set it to button, then it will simply use button 60, 61, 62, and 75, 58, and 59 on the left side. Light mode, again, is set to manual. You can also set telemetry and device. Didn't play around too much with these options, as well as the light brightness. Then we get the expert settings, and it's already, let's say, if you see this name, you might already think expert settings. Yes, these are really the expert settings. So if you really want to get the maximum out of the joystick, you can configure a lot of options over here. I must say that I left everything default. I didn't change too much here. But if you want, you can of course change it. And then the telemetry FFB, this is where you can say, okay, hey, this is the part which we discussed earlier, right? The force feedback. What kind of data do you want, right? What kind of things do you want to enable? And here you can see a lot of options. For example, if I go to the flaps and the flaps motion, you see it's enabled, and then the effect strength is 25, which means if I move the flaps, it will say likely you will feel it. If you go to, for example, the propellers and go to the propeller wash, you can see it's disabled. The AOA effect is disabled, but the propeller vibration is enabled. And these are the default settings, or these are the default settings, let's say, but you can tweak them if you want. Then you've got the axis travels, which is similar to the one on for the MSD, where you can say kind of adjust the mappings, the curves of the axis, and then you've got the special one because you can say, hey, miscellaneous shifter or the flight base. You can use the basis of vehicle shifter, right? But that's not applicable to Flight Simulator. Also, grip removal protection, you can simply enable it or disable it. If you're using the external cable to connect the grip to your PC rather than to the base itself, please do not enable this mod. Well, you can enable it, but I'd say it's really up to you again. Now we talked about this, I would say what would be nice if you would have some profiles. I initially thought, okay, hey, when I saw this list, I thought, okay, hey, really nice, 93 profiles. But what I figured out is that if you go to the list, and especially if you select, for example, Flight Simulator 2024, the list is empty. If you select Flight Simulator 2020, there are several profiles, but as soon as you say, hey, I want to use for the MHG grip, for example, or you set it to the AB6 FFB base, things will become empty. This is kind of a pity because I was hoping that they would have provided a lot of profiles because, as we know, configuring the joystick in Flight Simulator 2024 can be challenging. And I will show you in a few seconds how I configured it. I will go to the setup. I will quickly show you what I configured. But if you want to have a closer look at how to configure it, there will be future videos on how to do it for this joystick specifically. Besides that, we've got this nice gear. And this nice gear allows you to automatically start up on the Moza Cockpit and then hide it as well as keep it running. If you click on the cross, it will simply not shut down, but will close it. And you can switch between the different modes as well as the DPI scaling. I prefer to start automatically. Reason because this tool does something. It will, of course, is needed for the force beep feedback. So you need to make sure that it's running. In addition to that, you can report issues via multiple ways. They're, I would say, pretty extensive. You can create reports, you can email, you can via Discord, you can provide your issue. And they're actively monitoring it and releasing software on a regular basis, which brings us to this one. Because during testing, I received already at least 1 or 2 new updates. I think one for the firmware, one for the, I would say, software itself. And as you can see, 2026 525, but the previous ones are not shown. But there, if you look at the website, you can see it. There are releasing updates on a regular basis. About us, and then the experimental. Experimental doesn't contain a lot of things. You can revert back to previous firmwares, as it looks like. But there's no way to move to, let's say, kind of a, let's say, beta firmware, as far as I figured out. And then the miscellaneous, right? You can hide those pop-ups. There's still some typos, but you can say hide those pop-ups if you don't want to be reminded. But hey, that's fine. So now we went to this. Of course, we want to see how it works in Flight Simulator 2024. So let's start Flight Simulator 2024 and let's have a look at it. So I started Flight Simulator, so let's go to the settings because I'm going to show you some things. So first of all, what you need to be aware of is that the joystick will appear as one device, which I do think makes sense. In my case, you will see that I created profiles because by default there are no profiles, which means that you need to configure all the key bindings manually, which is a pity, but it happens with a lot of, let's say, joysticks, but it requires a lot of time and, let's say, patience in some cases. So how I configure them is like this, right? For those who never configured the joystick in Flight Simulator 2024, general controls are things like views, etc., switching views between external and internal, moving left, right, etc. Airplane controls is really controlling the airplane, right? I would say adjusting the ailerons, adjusting the flaps, throttling, etc. If I go to assigned, you can see which device I assigned or which buttons I assigned. In some cases, you see that there is a number 2 or number 1, which means that these buttons are assigned multiple times. For example, for the cockpit view and the external view, you can use those combinations as well as the reset external view. But in some other cases, you need to really define only one button per, I would say, function, because else it simply doesn't work. Also, what you see is that I use a combination of the analog buttons, the digital buttons, and the axes. So the axes are for the would say, controlling the aircraft, as well as the rudder, as well as the throttle over here. Whereas in some other cases, you can see that I, for example, used also the say joystick on the top, right, on the hatch, to control the views, which is nice. So for my watchers, I of course want to make it easy. So what I did is I exported the configuration. So you can find the link in the description of this video. The only thing you need to do is click the gear and then say import and then select the files which you downloaded from my repository. And that's simple, and that is currently only applicable to the GA, general aviation aircrafts, like for example the Cessna and some other ones. For helicopters, I will simply create a new one because it's completely different. And I will also create a video which goes step by step on how to configure your own profile. Because you might want to say, hey, this is nice, but I do like it a different way. So keep an eye on my channel for those videos. So now we have this, let's go inside an aircraft in a Cessna 172. Let's put it somewhere on an airport. So we're gonna do it. A little bit zoom out, or should we put it here? No. Let's put it on an airport. Here we go. So we're gonna put it on an international airport. You can say set departure and then click start flight. Now, what you always need to do is validate if everything works correctly. Especially with the throttle axis, you will likely need to make a small adjustment because it could work in a different way, which means it works, say, and when you push the throttle, it actually doesn't say increase the throttle, but it decreases the throttle. And to show you how to do that is you go to the settings menu. You go to the controls, and inside the controls, you go to the specific control. So in this case, I go to the assigned ones because it's easier. And then if I go to the throttle axis, you click on the gear, and you need to make sure that you set it to inverted axis. It's not always required, but in some cases you need to do it. So now here, right? Let's give it a try. So first of all, we're going to test if everything works, right? So we're going to move it. We can see it moves perfectly fine. We can increase and decrease throttling, as you can see. We can also increase and decrease the flaps. And I also feel the feedback, right? So I feel these flaps from the base unit. So it's really, I would say, giving that small vibration. So besides that, of course, we configured, I would say, the left look and the right look. And as you can see, if I use the quick views, if I release it, it will go back. This is a personal preference for me, but if you want to adjust it, you can go ahead and then make sure that you don't select the quick views, but the other ones. Now let's go outside the aircraft, and then also let's see if we can move the rudder. Yeah, rudder is also working, and you can also see that everything works perfect. So let's go inside again, and then I would say I'm gonna switch on the game sound because else you don't hear the engine sound. And I'm gonna, I would say, kind of increase the engine and the engine power. But before that, we of course need to remove the parking brakes. So I'm gonna describe what I feel, right? Because well, you can't see, or I can't, I would say, send you the, or let you feel the vibration of the joystick, which is being generated by that force feedback. One thing which I want to say about the joystick, it's nice, but the base itself is pretty big. So I've put it on my desk, but I do think it might be better to use that kind of, let's say, well, mechanism to connect it to your, let's say, desk, because then it's a little bit lower, because now it feels a little bit unnatural because it's pretty high, and I think for a long flight it might be also a little bit, let's say, you will get tired of it. So what I feel now is I feel the engine vibration. I also feel a lot of pushback, right? Feel if I release the joystick, it will go nicely to the center. And I would say it feels amazing. It's, I would say, not easy to control, right? You really feel that force feedback, which makes it feel very cool and very realistic, because I can imagine that if you're flying in real aircraft, also you can't move the joystick very easy. Although maybe they also have those nice systems like in cars, where you almost can, I would say, steer with one finger. But this feels really natural. In addition to that, right, I configured also other buttons, for example, to increase and decrease the trim. So, which you can find over here, of course. And you can see that I can nicely fly with this aircraft. And if we go outside, of course, we can also use those other views. So I can simply circle around, can do the flaps up and down, and this works perfectly. So although you can't, say, feel the high, say, force feedback, I think it works really nice. And what I really like is that you can adjust it, right? You might say, hey, for the flaps I really don't want to feel it, but for the engine I do want to feel it. In that case, you can simply, say, adjust it from within the Moza Cockpit software, because it has a crazy amount of options. The other thing which I would have loved to see is that they would have added some more, I would say, details in the cockpit, or in the cockpit, such as, for example, okay, hey, more help functions, which explain things, because in some cases you might search for a lot of things. Maybe they should have a wizard or something which guides you to the first few steps. And here you can see, right, you can nicely fly. It feels pretty natural. Also, that, let's say, that base unit, it does make a lot of noise. You can hear the bit, but it doesn't make an awful sound of noise. But I can imagine if you fly for a longer period, it might, let's say, result in, I would say, it generates some more heat, but you almost don't hear the engines. The second test we're gonna do is with the Boeing FA-18E Super Hornet, but before jumping in, we need to go to the settings, either via the gear on the top or by pressing the settings option. And then we need to go to the controls and make sure that the profile has been set correctly. In my case, you can see that it's already set correctly, but likely if you're using this for the first time, you need to adjust this to make sure that the profile has been set correctly. Once that is clear, you can, of course, start to take off. So let's give it a try. Here I can directly feel the force feedback. I'm not sure which profile it's using. Keep in mind that there are default profiles configured in the Moza Cockpit, and you can define your own profiles. As already promised, I will record a separate video about how to create those profiles and also how to tweak the profiles so you can adjust it to your aircraft. Because in some cases you might want to have, let's say, more force feedback, right? A stronger pushback compared to in other aircrafts. Because in this case with the jet, if I'm making a very steep turn like I'm currently, or like I'm gonna do right now, I do think that the force feedback is, well, it's okay, but it's not what I have expected. I would expect it to be much stronger. Unfortunately, as you could already see, there are not a lot of profiles in the Moza Cockpit for Flight Simulator 2024. I really hope that they would add that in the, I would say, near future, because that makes it easier for everybody. Now you would need to adjust it, which is still cool, right? Because you have the option, but it would be nice for those who are buying this device to have, let's say, already kind of a quick start by having those profiles already. Oh, we should have turned that or paused the mountain on the right side instead of on this one. Here I feel that there's more force feedback, right? So that's really cool. And comparing it with, for example, the Thrustmaster T16000, right, which doesn't have force feedback, this makes it so more, I would say, it gives a lot of, I would say, another dimension of flying in Flight Simulator. Also, if you would do, for example, if you would go into stall mode, you will definitely feel it. Maybe you even feel it earlier than even when you're not looking at the screen, right? So we're almost there, so pushing it forward, and here I can feel the force feedback. It's, well, I would have expected it to be even, I would say, stronger, of course, but hey, I know it's not using maybe the right profile, which I need to fix, and then it will likely feel much stronger. But at least we passed the challenge. So now let's jump to the Red Bull Air Race. So here we go. For this aircraft, I of course already activated the right profile because I've showed you once, multiple times already. You need to change the profile the first time you are using an aircraft. So in this case, if I was using this aircraft for the first time, which I wasn't by the way, then I should have adjusted the controller profile for the first time. So keep that in mind, that if you're using, for example, one of the other aircrafts in the Red Bull Air Race, make sure that you select the right profile before you can use it, because else likely not a lot will happen. Because there's no default profile for this joystick. For this one, I also do think that the force feedback could have been a little bit more. But again, I do think that it's using the generic profile, which is part of the default installation, which is okay. But say, likely if a real pilot would try this, they would say, hey, it requires a little bit more pushback, because if you do things like loopings and those steep turns, it is really, I would say, hard work for the pilot. And in this case, well, it still is a little bit hard work, but that's due to the fact that I'm not a really good, I would say, Red Bull Air Race pilot. But I would say it still works. Incorrect rotation. Here you can see it works. It gives pushback, which is of course super nice. So now let's jump to the conclusion. There's no denying it. Moza has built something incredibly compelling here, bringing 6 Nm of true telemetry driven force feedback down to this price tier. Completely changes the landscape for flight simulators who want maximum realism without breaking the bank. Is the joystick cheap? No, it still is above 500 euros, but you will get a lot of, I would say, technology and a lot of more realism to Flight Simulator. But what do you think? Does true force feedback justify upgrading your current joystick setup? Or are you holding out for something else? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you decide to buy the Moza, have a look at the description of this video, because there's a reference link where you can directly buy the device if you want. If you found this review useful, then don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos where I will test some hardware. I want to thank Moza Flight again for providing the device, because I would say they were really generous of sending me a device so I could test it myself. Thanks for watching, and until next time.